It was the kind of rain that didn't just soak your coat. It crawled into your bones. You'd think I'd be used to it, living in Portland most of my life, but some mornings hit differently. That day, it hit like the world wanted to rinse me clean or drown me, whichever came first. I was standing under the cracked awning outside a corner gas station, waiting for the only working ATM in a 5-block radius. The neon sign above me buzzed weakly. The line was short, just 3 people ahead, but the air felt heavy, not just with water, but with that quiet frustration you only see when people are tired of being tired. I pulled my sleeves over my fingers and checked my balance again on my banking app. $84.16. That was it. Rent was coming up, the electricity bill was overdue, and my son, Mason, had outgrown his shoes. Again. He was 11, all knees and elbows and heart. I'd promised him pancakes that morning, but the milk had gone bad, and the last egg cracked funny. So here I was, standing in the rain with a headache from skipping breakfast, trying to stretch $84 into gas, groceries, and something that resembled a meal a kid might smile about. The man in front of me cursed softly as his transaction failed. The woman behind him sighed so loud I could feel it. She clutched a small dog in her jacket, and the poor thing trembled harder than she did. I adjusted the hood of my thin windbreaker and shifted my weight, trying not to think about the wetness seeping into my socks. That's when I noticed him. He wasn't in line. Not exactly. Just hovering near the edge of the awning, rain running down his neck, his hair plastered to his forehead. No umbrella, no bag, just a wind-beaten denim jacket and hands jammed deep into his pockets, like he was trying to hold himself together. He caught my eye for a second, then looked down, and then, barely above the rain, I heard him say it. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to ask, but could I go ahead of you? I just need a second." I blinked. The woman with the dog let out a short, sharp laugh behind me. "Seriously?" she muttered. The guy in front gave him a once-over and turned away. I looked at him. Really looked. There was no aggression in his voice, no shame, either. Just weariness. Like asking this was the hardest thing he'd done all week. For a moment, I hesitated. $84, pancakes, rent. But then I nodded and stepped aside. "Sure, go ahead." He looked up, surprised, I think, and nodded once. "Thanks." He moved forward, slow and careful, like someone used to being in the way. I watched as he approached the ATM, rain dripping from his sleeves onto the keypad. I didn't know it then, but something shifted in that moment. Not big, not loud, just shifted. Sometimes, when the world feels like it's pushing you down, giving someone else a step up feels like rebellion. And in that instant, soaked and broke and cold, I felt oddly steady. But that was before I realized my wallet was gone. I didn't see where he went after. By the time I stepped up to the ATM, he was already disappearing down the street, shoulders hunched against the wind, boots splashing through a puddle like he didn't care anymore. He hadn't taken long, less than a minute. No fumbling, no second tries. Just punched a few buttons, took what looked like a single bill, and left. I didn't think about it much in that moment. I was too busy shielding the screen with my hand and debating whether I should take out 60 or just 40. I settled on 60. That left 24 in the account. Not much, but enough to keep the gas tank above empty and grab a few essentials. I stuffed the bills in my pocket, grabbed a small gallon of milk and a pack of instant oatmeal from inside the gas station, and made my way back to the car. Mason was at school. I had 2 hours before my shift at the diner. Just enough time to breathe. Or so I thought. The first time I reached for my wallet was at the red light on Division Street. My fingers grazed the empty spot in my coat where it always sat. I stopped breathing. I pulled over, turned on the cabin light, and searched again. Jacket pockets, jeans, grocery bag. Nothing. I even dumped the oatmeal on the seat and checked inside. It was gone. My stomach dropped in that slow, sinking way that happens when something bad starts to feel real. At first, I thought maybe I left it at home, but I knew that was a lie. I'd had it at the ATM. I'd checked my account on my phone, and suddenly I remembered him. The man in the wet denim jacket, the quiet voice, the rain dripping off his nose. I didn't want to believe it, but my brain started stitching the narrative faster than I could stop it. What if that's why he wanted to cut in line? What if I'd been tricked? What if this was some small-time hustle, act pitiful, gain sympathy, and lift a wallet while the mark wasn't looking? The thought made my throat tighten. Not because of the money, though losing the cash stung, but because I'd given something without question, something small. And now I felt stupid for it. Not angry. Not yet. Just stupid. I sat there in my beat-up Subaru, rain streaking the windshield, and thought, maybe next time I'll just keep my spot in line. But even then, even while cursing myself, I wasn't sure if I meant it. I drove home with the heat turned up and my thoughts turned off. That was my defense mechanism. Going numb. I'd gotten good at it over the years. Bills piling up? Go numb. Mason getting sick again? Numb. Tips down 2 weeks in a row? Numb. It was easier than spiraling, but the emptiness in my coat pocket had a way of crawling under my skin. When I got home, I checked every corner of the apartment. Kitchen counters, couch cushions, the laundry pile by the hallway door. Nothing. I called the gas station, just in case. A bored teenager answered, said no wallet had been turned in. Sounded like he'd barely looked. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. The wallet wasn't fancy. Fake leather, soft from years of use. Inside were the basics. ID, debit card, Mason's school photo from last year, a folded drawing he'd done of us holding hands in front of a huge pizza slice. It was silly, but it was mine, and now it was gone. I tried to tell myself maybe I dropped it. Maybe someone honest would find it. Maybe it wasn't stolen. But deep down, I'd already filed it under lesson learned, and that stung more than the loss itself. Because I wanted to believe people still had good in them, that helping someone, even in something as minor as letting them cut in line, wasn't naive. But in that moment, sitting on a mattress that sagged in the middle, with groceries that wouldn't last 3 days, and a boy who still believed pancakes could fix everything, I wasn't sure anymore. I thought of his face, the man in the denim jacket. He hadn't looked like a thief. But I guess that's what makes it worse. You don't expect betrayal to look so quiet. That night, I tucked Mason into bed and told him a story about a bear who wanted to open a bakery. He laughed and asked if bears knew how to make cinnamon rolls. I smiled, but my heart was somewhere else. When I finally lay down, the rain hadn't stopped. It tapped against the windows like a reminder. Of what, I wasn't sure. Maybe that I still had $24. Maybe that I should stop being so soft. Or maybe, just maybe, that the story wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The fluorescent lights at St. Luke's urgent care never turned off, but they never quite woke you up either. It was my 3rd overnight shift that week. the kind where your eyelids get heavy around 3 a.m., and even the beep of the monitors can't keep you alert. The break room smelled like burnt popcorn and antiseptic. I sat with my legs pulled up on the plastic chair, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I even remembered it existed. The whole way outside was quiet, just the soft shuffle of rubber soles and the occasional cough echoing from one of the exam rooms. I was reading over patient files, trying to stay awake, when I saw him. At first I thought I was hallucinating from lack of sleep, but then I blinked, and he was still there, standing just outside the security glass near the waiting room. Same build, same posture, but this time no denim jacket, no wet hair. He looked different, clean-shaven, wearing a navy coat, holding a small paper bag in one hand. He didn't look lost anymore. He looked like someone who belonged in a bank commercial, polished, quiet, calm. My breath hitched. He met my eyes for a second, then gave a polite, uncertain nod, like he wasn't sure if I recognized him. I stood slowly, heart beating louder than it should have. He waited until I came out from behind the counter. Then he spoke. "I think this belongs to you." He held out a small worn object, wrapped in a Ziploc bag. My wallet. I didn't take it right away. My fingers hovered. I felt off balance. "I found it the day after," he said. "In the parking lot. You must have dropped it near the curb." I studied his face. He didn't seem like he was lying, but something about him was still unreadable. "Why didn't you bring it back sooner?" I asked, before I could stop myself. His expression softened, almost embarrassed. "I wasn't ready," he said quietly. That answer made no sense, and yet it made all the sense in the world. I took the wallet, opened it. Everything was there. The $24 in crumpled bills, Mason's drawing, my ID. He hadn't touched a thing. "I also brought this," he added, lifting the paper bag. "It's a thank you. Coffee and a muffin. I figured you might be working." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. But something about the way he stood, respectful, unsure, made me nod, just a little. "Thanks," I finally whispered. Then he smiled, not wide, not charming, just tired and real. He didn't linger after that, just handed me the coffee, nodded again, and walked out into the night like nothing happened. But everything had. I sat down slowly in the break room, fingers still wrapped around the paper cup he'd left me. It was fresh, still warm, still smelling faintly of cinnamon, and suddenly I was awake, wide awake. He was the same man, no doubt about it, same height, same quiet energy. But something fundamental had shifted. The first time I saw him, he looked like a shadow barely holding itself together. Now, he looked like he had somewhere to be. There was purpose in his posture, a quiet precision in the way he moved, like someone used to control, someone who'd once been in charge of things, important things. He hadn't told me his name. He hadn't apologized for the confusion, or for vanishing. But something about his eyes. The tiredness was still there, yes. But behind it was something else now. Something I couldn't name. I kept the coffee. Didn't drink it. Just set it on the counter next to the forgotten files and stared at it like it might explain him to me. I wanted to believe the best. That maybe I had dropped my wallet. That he was telling the truth. But my guard was up now. Not in a dramatic way. Just tightened. the way it always does when life teaches you one too many lessons. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. The coffee went cold again. The patients came and went. No one else unexpected walked through the door. The next day I found myself checking the parking lot when I arrived for my shift. Like maybe he'd be there. Like maybe he'd offer another strange act of closure I didn't know I needed. But he wasn't. He didn't come the day after either. Then, on the third day, he showed up again. Same coat, same paper bag. But this time, he didn't wait by the glass. He walked straight in, calm as ever, and placed the bag on the counter. "Hi," he said. "I didn't know if you worked weekends." I stared at him for a long second before responding. "You brought more coffee?" "And a lemon scone this time," he said with a quiet grin. "I figured variety wouldn't hurt." I should have asked what he wanted, why he kept showing up, what his game was. But I didn't, because deep down, I knew he wasn't playing a game. He looked at me like someone who hadn't talked to a real person in a long time, like someone who didn't expect to be seen, let alone remembered. So I nodded, and this time I poured us both a cup. He sat across from me in the break room, folded hands resting on the table like he didn't want to take up too much space. We didn't talk much that first time, just sipped, sat in the warmth, let the silence hold whatever it was neither of us could say yet. But I noticed something. When he left, he took nothing with him, not even the umbrella I saw tucked behind the break room door, the one I thought I'd lost weeks ago. He had brought it back too, and left it behind, without a word. He didn't show up again for a week. I wasn't waiting, not really, but I noticed. The way you notice when a noise you got used to suddenly stops. There was something about him, about the quiet rhythm of his visits, that had started to make space in my routine, like he'd become part of the background hum of my strange little life. Then, Thursday morning, I opened my locker before my shift and found an envelope wedged between my spare scrubs and a box of granola bars. No name, just "For you," written on the front in neat block letters. My first instinct was caution. The world had taught me that unsolicited envelopes rarely brought good things, but I opened it anyway. Inside, 3 crisp $100 bills and a small note, handwritten. Not for the wallet, not for the coffee. For the moment you gave me that morning. I needed it more than I can say. That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just those words and the quiet weight of unexpected kindness, or repayment, depending on how you looked at it. I stood there for a long time, holding the note like it might start talking. $300. That was more than a tip. More than a thank you. That was groceries for 2 weeks, a past-due phone bill, gas and laundry, and maybe even a small toy for Mason. But it also felt heavy in a different way. I didn't know what to feel. I'd let someone cut in line. That was it. I'd offered a piece of plastic umbrella in a few minutes of mercy. It hadn't felt noble or grand, just human. And now this. A part of me was grateful. Another part was deeply unsettled. Because if this was how the world worked, if a simple gesture could be repaid in cash, wrapped in mystery, then what did that say about how much people were starving for compassion? I tucked the envelope back into my locker, not sure if I'd use it. Not yet. I needed time. That night, I made pancakes for Mason, with blueberries even. His eyes lit up when he saw the plate, and he asked if it was a special occasion. I said no, but deep down, it felt like one. because something was changing. Not in a dramatic way, not with fireworks or violins, just in the quiet places, the unexpected corners, in lockers, in break rooms, in the weight of a folded note that reminded me, maybe I hadn't lost my faith in people after all. Maybe it had just gone quiet, waiting for someone to speak first. I'm not the type to dig. Most of my life, I've been too tired to chase questions I didn't need answered. If someone gave me their first name, that was enough. If they didn't, well, maybe they had their reasons. But after that envelope, I couldn't help it. There was no return address, no contact information, no clue beyond the handwriting. Tight, deliberate. Male, probably. Educated. Maybe military. I checked the envelope again the next morning, like maybe I'd missed something. Still blank. Still quiet. So I did what anyone would do. I Googled him, or tried to. I didn't even have a name. Just an image burned in my brain. A man in a navy coat, once waterlogged and half invisible, now composed, calm, walking quietly through the mess of my week, like he was looking for something. I searched phrases like, "Man returns lost wallet Portland," and "anonymous tip envelope urgent care." Nothing. Not a single article, tweet, or Reddit thread. I even checked the lost and found posts on Facebook for the neighborhood. Again, nothing. That's when it hit me. I wasn't trying to find his identity. I was trying to find his story. Because there was something about him that didn't add up. Not in a shady way, but in a too clean for this kind of way. Like someone used to being noticed suddenly choosing to disappear. I asked around casually at the clinic. No one else had seen him. Not security. Not the front desk. Just me. I couldn't tell if that made me feel special or set up. That weekend, I took Mason to the park. The sun peeked through for the first time in days, and we fed ducks stale bread and laughed about how aggressive the geese were. And there, across the pond, under a willow tree, he was. Same coat, same posture, alone. He wasn't watching us, just staring at the water like it owed him answers. I almost waved, almost called out, but I didn't. Instead, I watched for a moment, trying to decide if I was looking at a ghost, a stranger, or something in between. He looked untouchable, like someone caught between chapters, and something in me whispered, "He's not lost. He's choosing to stay hidden." I didn't understand why, but I knew this. Google might not know who he was, but I wasn't done trying to find out. It took me 3 more days to work up the nerve. 3 days of restless thoughts, of rerunning that image of him alone by the water, of wondering what he saw there that kept him still for so long. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister, not my co-worker who gossiped like it was a sport, and definitely not Mason. I just went back. Late afternoon, the same park, same tree, but this time, he wasn't across the pond. He was sitting on a bench near the path, hands folded between his knees, watching the empty swings shift in the breeze. I stood there for a second, trying to decide whether to walk away, but something about the quietness of the moment held me. So I sat down on the opposite end of the bench, giving him space. He didn't look surprised, didn't even glance over at first. Then he said softly, "I wondered if you'd come." I didn't answer right away, just looked at him, really looked. No coat this time, just a plain sweater, worn at the sleeves, and jeans that fit too well to be random. His shoes were scuffed, but not dirty. His posture still carried the kind of stillness you don't find in people running from the law, but maybe in those running from themselves. "I don't even know your name," I finally said. He nodded, eyes still on the swings. "Elliot." I waited, but nothing followed. No last name, no apology. "You keep showing up," I said, "and disappearing." "I know. Why?" He let out a slow breath, like he'd been holding it for longer than he realized. "Because I don't know how to be seen anymore." That wasn't the answer I expected. He glanced at me then, his eyes a strange mix of guarded and raw. "I used to be someone," he said. "A job with weight, a life with momentum, but that was before everything slowed down and fell apart." I didn't press. "Do you ever feel like the version of yourself you used to be died while you were still breathing?" he asked, his voice barely above the wind. I swallowed hard. Yes. But I didn't say it. I looked at him and said instead, "I think sometimes we outlive the lives we built, and we're not always sure what to do with what's left." That made him turn fully toward me, the smallest flicker of relief passing through his expression, like someone finally said the right line in a script that had been waiting too long. He didn't tell me details, no job title, no sob story, just enough truth to fill the space between us with something human. We sat there until the sun dipped low and the air turned sharp. He stood up first. "I'll see you around, Hannah." I never told him my name, but somehow he already knew, and I wasn't sure whether to be unsettled or strangely comforted. He found me again the following Tuesday. I was sitting on the back steps behind the diner during my 15-minute break, sipping lukewarm tea from a paper cup, staring at the dumpsters like they might offer life advice. The door creaked open, and there he was. Elliot. No warning. No explanation. Just a quiet presence like the air shifting before a storm. "You mind if I sit?" he asked. I shook my head, scooted over without saying a word. He sat beside me, not too close, not too far. We watched the wind nudge a crushed soda can across the lot. Then he said it, out of nowhere, no preamble. "I used to have everything." Just like that. I didn't turn to look at him. I just let the words sink in. They didn't sound bitter or braggy, just hollow, like a bell rung once and left to echo. "Money?" I asked quietly. He nodded once. "Power?" Another nod. "Family?" His jaw clenched. And this time, he didn't answer. That told me more than any words could have. I finally looked at him, and I saw it, the ache behind his quiet, the ghost of someone who used to move through life like it belonged to him, and now wandered it like a stranger. "I lost it all in stages," he said, "not in a single blow, which somehow made it worse, like watching a house rot from the inside while pretending the porch light still worked." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. He didn't expect me to. After a moment, he added, softer, "Sometimes I think the worst part wasn't losing it. It was realizing that no one noticed I was gone." That's when I understood something simple and terrifying. Elliot wasn't afraid of having nothing. He was afraid of becoming nothing. And for the first time since the morning at the ATM, I felt the shiver of knowing this man's story was far from over. It was just that no one had stayed long enough to hear it. It was a slow Wednesday when I found it. I was at the grocery store, standing in line with a half-gallon of milk, eggs, and a loaf of bread, the staples of tired mothers and tight budgets. When I reached for my wallet, something fell out. It fluttered to the ground like a leaf, small, folded in half, with crayon streaks on one side. I bent down to pick it up, thinking it was one of Mason's drawings. He liked to leave me little ones in my pockets, scribbles of robots, pizza slices, or stick figure versions of us that always had me smiling like an idiot. But when I opened this one, I froze. It wasn't Mason's. The handwriting was different. The shapes were softer, more careful. A rainbow arched over two figures, one big, one small, standing under a sun that smiled with crooked teeth. In the corner, written in shaky purple crayon, were the words, "Me and Daddy." My throat tightened. I looked inside my wallet again, tucked behind my ID, folded so neatly I'd never have noticed it. It wasn't mine, not from Mason, not from any of his school stuff, which left only one explanation. Elliot. He had returned my wallet, everything intact, untouched, or so I thought. But this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. A message. I stared at the drawing for a long moment, long enough for the cashier to call me forward and snap me out of it. All day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who had drawn it? Why had he kept it in my wallet? Why leave it there at all? I didn't know much about Elliot. Not really. Just breadcrumbs. A voice full of absence. A coat that used to belong to someone better off. A man who moved like he had nowhere to be but didn't want to go home. But now, there was a child in the picture. Literally. And it wasn't just a detail. It was a thread. I went home, fixed dinner, and set the drawing on the counter next to the salt. I kept glancing at it, like it might explain itself if I stared hard enough. But it didn't. It just sat there, bright and innocent and sad. And I realized something I hadn't before. This man wasn't wandering because he was lost. He was carrying something too heavy to put down. I don't usually ask people to meet, especially not men I barely know, men with complicated silences and shadows in their eyes. But the next morning, I texted the number Elliot had scribbled on the inside flap of the coffee bag he once left me. I hadn't used it before. "Can we talk? Today. My treat. Montrose Cafe, by the bookstore." He replied 2 minutes later. Just, "Okay." It was raining again when I got there, because of course it was. Spring in Oregon didn't know how to stop grieving. He was already seated when I walked in. Same corner booth, black hoodie, no umbrella. Hands wrapped around a chipped mug like it was the only warmth he trusted. I slid into the seat across from him, my fingers tightening around my cup as I spoke. "I found the drawing." He didn't pretend to be surprised, just nodded. I waited for an explanation, for something neat and linear, but Elliot never did anything in straight lines. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Her name was Lila." The words dropped gently, like he was setting them down for the first time in years. "My daughter," he added. 6 years old." I said nothing. My heart was already climbing up into my throat. "She drew that 2 days before she got sick." His voice cracked, barely, then steadied. "It was the last thing she ever gave me." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. He looked down into his mug. "I used to carry it with me everywhere. Wallet, coat pocket, glove box. I couldn't let go of it. Until that morning at the ATM. I frowned slightly. Why that morning? He exhaled through his nose like he wasn't sure either. I hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. I was living out of my car, showering at truck stops. My brain was fog. Grief, guilt, shame, all of it. He looked up, and I saw it again. The break beneath the surface. "I saw you holding that broken umbrella, still letting me go ahead, still protecting me from the rain. And I thought, Maybe I don't need to carry her everywhere to remember her. Maybe I could leave a piece of her with someone who hadn't forgotten how to be kind. I blinked hard, pressing my lips together. He reached into his coat and pulled out another folded paper. The same style, same crayon strokes. She used to draw the sun with a face because she thought it was watching over us, he said, almost smiling. Said it followed me to work because it didn't trust me to come home on time. My throat tightened. Elliot placed the drawing on the table, gently. She's why I disappeared, he said, but also why I'm still here. I didn't know what to say, so I did what I could. I reached over, covered his hand with mine. He didn't pull away. We sat like that, a man, a woman, a ghost between them, and a cup of coffee slowly going cold, both of us learning in our own way how to breathe again. We didn't talk much after that. Not at the table, not during the walk outside. He held the door open for me like it was second nature, but his eyes had drifted somewhere far away again, someplace I didn't have a map to. As we stepped into the wet street, I finally asked the question that had been circling my mind since the beginning. Elliot, what did you do? Before all this? He stopped walking. For a second, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he gave a small, tired laugh. I used to sign my name at the bottom of press releases, he said. Used to shake hands with men who had private planes and colder hearts. I raised an eyebrow, gently. Finance? He nodded once. Venture capital, tech, startups, the works. I shouldn't have been surprised. The way he carried himself, the careful language, the silence that came not from fear, but from knowing the cost of saying too much. But after Lila died, he continued, none of it made sense anymore. The meetings, the deadlines, the money. It all felt like sand through my fingers, and I hated the sound of my own name. I tilted my head. Why? He looked down at the sidewalk, water pooling around his shoes. Because it was on every article, he said. Every email, every sympathy card. Elliot Hartley, CEO. Elliot Hartley, grieving father. Elliot Hartley, foundation donor. He shook his head. It stopped feeling like me. It felt like a performance I couldn't keep up. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound small, so I walked beside him, quietly. Because what do you say to a man who once had the world memorizing his name, and now flinches every time he hears it? That's when I understood. He hadn't just lost his family. He'd lost the man he was supposed to be, the version of himself that knew what day it was, that picked up dry cleaning, that bought birthday balloons and believed he had time. And now, he was just trying to live inside the pieces. No spotlight, no script, no name badge. Just Elliot, wearing his grief like a coat, still damp from storms long gone. It started slowly. At first, I thought it was coincidence, a passing glance, a shared sidewalk. But then it kept happening. I'd be leaving the grocery store, and he'd be by the bench outside, sipping black coffee, pretending to read the classifieds. I'd show up to work early for my weekend shift, and he'd already be there, walking past the clinic with a paper bag from the bakery down the street. Once, I caught him helping an elderly man load water bottles into the trunk of a car in the pharmacy parking lot. The old man tried to tip him. He refused, smiled, and walked away like it was nothing. He never made it feel like a pursuit. He didn't hover or make excuses. He was just around. Not constantly. Just enough for me to notice. Just enough for it to start feeling normal. I told myself not to read into it. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he walked a lot. Maybe we just had overlapping orbits. But the truth? A part of me liked it. There was something oddly comforting about his quiet reappearances. He wasn't showing up with gifts or gestures. He didn't ask for anything. He was just there. In this world where most people passed by each other like ships with broken radios, here was someone who kept showing up, without announcement, without obligation. One Tuesday morning, I was taking out the trash behind the diner, apron still tied, hands still smelling like bacon grease. I turned the corner and there he was again, crouched down, feeding a stray cat with half a muffin from his coat pocket. He looked up, not startled. "Good morning," he said, like we'd planned it. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You stalking me, Elliot?" He smirked. "Or maybe we just keep ending up in the same places." "Funny how that works." He stood up, brushing crumbs from his hands. "You know this alley's got better company than most boardrooms I used to sit in." I snorted. "You've clearly never worked in food service." He chuckled, and for a second, just a second, the weight he carried seemed lighter. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. But that day, and a few after that, I started leaving a second cup of coffee out back, just in case. No note, no expectation, just a quiet invitation in a world where most people don't get many. I've known a lot of loud people in my life. People who fill the air with noise because they're afraid of what silence might say. People who talk just to be heard, not to connect. Elliot wasn't like that. He had a kind of quiet that didn't press in on you. It didn't ask for anything. It just made room. There were mornings he'd show up behind the diner and say nothing at all. Just nod. Take a sip from the cup I left. Sit beside me while I scrolled through my phone or stared at nothing. And that was enough. Sometimes we talked. About small things. Weather, coffee, old TV shows. But more often than not, we just sat. At first, I thought maybe it was awkward. Maybe we were two broken clocks ticking out of sync. But over time, I realized something surprising. I felt more at ease beside him than I had in years. Not because we had some deep connection, or because he tried to understand me, but because he didn't try to fix me, or himself, or the moment. He just showed up. One morning, I remember sitting on the back step, my knees pulled to my chest, exhausted from Mason waking up with nightmares again. I hadn't had time to wash my hair. I'd spilled coffee on my sleeve. My phone bill was past due. I didn't want to talk, didn't want to be seen. But Elliot was already there, leaning against the wall, holding his cup like a ritual. He glanced at me, offered a faint smile, and said nothing. And God, I needed that silence. The kind that didn't expect me to explain anything. The kind that didn't rush in with advice or pity, just presence. After a while, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small book, a beat-up paperback with a folded corner and coffee stains. He handed it to me wordlessly. On the first page, in tiny handwriting, someone had written, "To be seen without being asked to perform. That's the closest thing to love I've known." I didn't ask who wrote it. I didn't need to. I just closed the book gently and held it like a fragile truth. That day, we didn't speak more than 5 words. But when he left, something in me felt less alone. Sometimes, the loudest kind of healing is the kind that whispers. It had been nearly a month since that morning at the ATM, but I still remembered the way the rain hit sideways, the way the cold wrapped around my wrists like a question I couldn't answer. I also remembered the umbrella, broken spoked, faded red, always tilting slightly to one side. It wasn't pretty, but it had done its job for years. Until that day, when I handed it to a stranger and walked away with nothing but soaked socks and a stomach full of doubt. I'd assumed it was gone forever. Until the morning I found it again. It was sitting in the alley behind the diner, leaning gently against the back door. Dry, clean, and tied shut with a thin black ribbon like it had just come back from some kind of journey. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe someone else had one just like it, but when I picked it up, I knew. The small tear near the handle, the faded initials stitched into the edge. HC. It was mine. Tucked inside the strap was a small envelope. Cream-colored. No stamp. No name. Just a single handwritten note on a blank card. You didn't just give me a place in line. You gave me space to be seen. I'm still figuring out how to return that, but I haven't forgotten. No signature. But I didn't need one. I held the card in my hands longer than I meant to. It wasn't the note itself that hit me. It was the phrasing, the quiet intentionality behind it, the idea that something I did without thinking had left a mark. Most days, I felt invisible, a blur moving between jobs and grocery runs, managing homework and rent notices, trying to keep a roof over a growing boy's head. And yet somehow, on the worst kind of morning, I had mattered. I stood there for a while, the umbrella tucked under my arm, the card pressed to my chest. Elliot didn't owe me anything, and I hadn't done it to be remembered. But this was more than a thank you. It was acknowledgement, a reminder that even small acts, especially the ones that feel like nothing, can echo louder than we think. That night, I opened the umbrella on the balcony just to hear the sound of rain tapping against it again. It wasn't broken anymore. And neither, I realized, was I. The email came just after 11 a.m. Subject line: Meal status change. Immediate attention required. I opened it on my phone while standing behind the counter at the diner, waiting for a plate of overcooked fries to be ready. It was short, coldly efficient. Mason Holloway no longer qualifies for reduced lunch. Outstanding balance, $13.20. Please settle by end of week to avoid disruption. But the disruption had already happened. When I picked Mason up from school that afternoon, he didn't say much. Just shrugged off his backpack and climbed into the car, staring out the window like the sky owed him an apology. I asked how his day was. He said, "Fine." I asked if he ate. He hesitated. Mrs. Lang gave me half her sandwich. I didn't respond. My throat had closed up too tight to get words through. Later that night, while he was brushing his teeth, I checked his backpack, found a folded slip crammed between math homework and a crayon drawing of a tree with a dinosaur in it. The slip read, "Lunch denied. Balance required to reinstate." Black ink, red stamp. It wasn't just a notice. It was a scarlet letter. I sat down at the kitchen table with my head in my hands. $13.20. That was the number that made my son go hungry. That was the number that made a 7-year-old feel like he'd done something wrong. We weren't poor enough for full assistance. Not quite. But we weren't stable either. I made too little to breathe, too much to be seen. I'd stretched every dollar from Elliot's envelope weeks ago, on groceries, school supplies, a cheap dentist visit when Mason cracked a baby tooth on a popcorn kernel. Now I was back to empty, scraping by on tip jars and leftover soup. I thought of messaging Elliot. Just a quick text, a question, a lifeline. but the words stuck. Not because I didn't think he'd help, but because I didn't want to need him. That was the hardest part of all this. Not the hunger, not the notices, but the shame. The kind that doesn't come with bruises, but settles behind your ribs and makes it hard to breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at that slip of paper and promised myself I'd find the $13.20 somehow. Because no kid should ever have to say, "My teacher shared her lunch." And no mother should ever have to pretend that doesn't shatter her. It was almost 7 when I saw the light. I'd just gotten off my second shift, arms sore from scrubbing the griddle, smelling like grease and burnt coffee. I was cutting across Main Street, half out of habit, half out of desperation for fresh air. That's when I saw it. A warm yellow glow on the second floor of the old real estate office, above the florist. That building had been dark for months. Ever since the property manager skipped town, it sat quiet, one of those forgotten corners of the city no one talked about, just walked past. But that night, one window glowed, and in it, a figure moved. Elliot. He was pacing slowly, holding a phone in one hand, gesturing with the other, not wildly, but with focus. Purpose. Like he was explaining something that mattered. I froze on the sidewalk, unsure if I should wave, knock, or disappear. Instead, I watched. After a minute, he hung up, walked to the window, and stared out. Not at anything in particular, but like he was thinking in the direction of the sky. He hadn't seen me. I stepped back into the shadows. Waited. 10 minutes later, the front door of the building creaked open. He stepped out, jacket slung over his shoulder, same worn shoes, but a different energy entirely. He looked grounded. Not like the man from the rain. Not like the man who stared through me at an ATM. This version of Elliot walked with quiet certainty, like he'd remembered how to carry his name again. I stepped forward. "You work up there?" I asked casually. He paused, gave a half smile. "For now." "What is it? Startup thing again?" He shook his head. "No. Community project. Micro investments, some property rehab, a few educational grants. Nothing flashy." "You opened an office without telling me?" He laughed softly. "I didn't know if I could follow through. I still don't, but I needed to start somewhere." There was no arrogance in his voice, no pride, just humility, steady and real. I leaned against the wall. "So you're not just the guy who shows up behind diners anymore?" He glanced at me. "Would you be disappointed if I still was?" I smiled. "Only if you stop drinking bad coffee with me." He looked up at the glowing window above, then back at me. "You know," he said, voice quieter now, "for a while I thought disappearing meant freedom, but it turns out the real freedom is showing up, with both hands open." I didn't say anything, just reached into my coat and pulled out something I hadn't planned to give. The card, the lunch debt notice, folded tight, soft at the corners. He took it, read it, then met my eyes without hesitation. "Give me an hour," he said simply. "No," I replied. His brow furrowed. "You'll take 2, I added. "And I'm buying coffee." That night, the debt was gone. But more importantly, so was the man who once hid in the rain. In his place stood someone visible, not because of power or wealth or charity, but because he chose to be seen again. A week after the lunch debt disappeared, he handed me an envelope. Not cash, not charity. Inside was a printed job offer, part-time assistant, flexible hours, administrative support at his new office, the one above the florist. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, a regular paycheck, a step up from juggling shifts and scraping tip jars. I should have said yes. I knew that. It made sense. But I didn't. I looked him in the eye and said, "I can't." He didn't flinch, didn't try to convince me. "Okay," he said quietly. "Can I ask why?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because it sounded stupid out loud. "I'm afraid," I finally admitted. "Afraid of what?" "Of forgetting how to stand on my own." He nodded, as if he understood, but I kept talking, the words spilling now, too raw to stop. "For years, it's just been me and Mason. I've worked myself raw, made it through late bills, broken fridges, stomachs running on coffee. I know how to survive. I don't know how to let someone else carry part of it without feeling like I'm slipping." He looked down at the envelope in my hand. "This isn't a rescue mission," he said. "It's just a job, something you've already earned." I shook my head. "No, you feel like you owe me, that umbrella, that moment. I didn't do it to be repaid." "And I'm not paying you back," he said gently. "I'm inviting you to walk forward. With me, not behind, not beneath." The words hit deeper than I expected, but still I couldn't say yes, because deep down, I wasn't afraid of the job, or even of Elliot. I was afraid of losing the version of myself I had fought so hard to become, the one who survived storms and never asked for favors. Because asking, receiving, trusting, those things can be harder than hunger. He tucked his hands in his pockets. "The door's open. You can come through when you're ready. Or not. I'll still be here. Bad coffee and all." He smiled and then walked away. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the offer. It wasn't about the money. It was about control, and the terrifying idea that maybe I didn't have to do this life alone anymore. Maybe choosing help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was a new kind of strength, but I wasn't ready. So I tucked the envelope in a drawer and told myself, not yet, maybe soon. He stopped showing up on a Thursday. I didn't notice right away. At first I just thought, he's probably busy, the kind of busy people get when they're finally rebuilding something. But then Friday came, then Monday, then the next weekend. No second coffee cup left untouched out back. No quiet footsteps along the alley gravel. No soft knock on the screen door. Just silence. And strangely, it bothered me. Not in the desperate way it might have, once. Not because I needed him, but because I'd gotten used to his presence like a reliable draft of wind through an old window. He was just part of the rhythm. And now the rhythm had gone quiet. 3 weeks passed. Each one felt longer than it should have. The seat at the end of the diner, the one by the window where he used to nurse bad coffee and read the classifieds, sat empty like it was waiting for someone to remember why it mattered. I didn't ask around. I could have. Probably should have. But there was this strange, fragile pride in pretending I wasn't wondering. Until a regular, Pete the mailman, slid into the booth one morning and muttered, "That tall guy, the one with the calm voice, haven't seen him lately? Everything okay with him?" I shrugged. No idea. Pete gave me a knowing glance. You sure? I didn't answer, because I wasn't. One night, after closing, I walked to the office above the florist. The lights were off, windows dark, door locked, no sign of life. The landlord downstairs said the guy had paid the lease up front, 6 months, cash, but hadn't been in for a while. That's when it hit me. I missed him. More than the silence. More than the coffee. I missed knowing there was someone out there carrying something quietly, the way I did. Someone who didn't flinch at pain. Who didn't look away when life got awkward or hard or broke your spine a little. And the worst part? I hadn't said thank you. Not properly. Not for the note. Not for the umbrella. Not for the quiet. Not for seeing me. I just let the rhythm carry us. Until it didn't. One night, while Mason was coloring in the living room, I found myself staring out the window at the street lamp where he used to park. It was silly, I know. People come and go. No one owes you their presence. But some people leave something behind. And Elliot? He'd left a space. Not a wound. Not a need. Just a space. And suddenly, I didn't want it to stay empty. It showed up on my porch on a rainy Tuesday. Same umbrella. Same frayed edge near the handle. Same faded burgundy that had seen one too many storms. Folded neatly. Leaning against the screen door like it had walked itself there. I stood frozen for a second, groceries in one arm, keys dangling from the other. I wasn't sure what surprised me more, that it was back, or that there was no one around to return it. No knock, no note, no Elliot, just the umbrella. I stared at it the way you stare at something that doesn't make sense in your timeline anymore. Something that belongs to a version of you that isn't entirely gone, but isn't entirely here either. It had rained all day, the kind of slow, steady rain that made the air heavy and the silence louder. I bent down, picked it up, and felt the weight in my hand. Slightly damp, like it had been used, recently. Inside, I set it on the kitchen table and just looked at it. Mason peeked over my shoulder. Is that yours? I nodded. Kind of. He didn't ask more. Kids know when a question is too big for the room. I made tea, left the umbrella alone, but my eyes kept drifting toward it. And eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I unlatched the strap and opened it carefully, expecting, hoping, something. There was no envelope this time, no card, no message, no little symbol that explained why it was back or who brought it. But tucked just above one of the spokes was a dry cleaner's tag. Faint numbers. A location name I didn't recognize. Downtown, near the old post office. It was something. The next day, after my shift, I went. The dry cleaner was small, tucked between a boarded-up pet store and a payday loan place. The bell over the door chimed like it hadn't been used much. An older woman looked up from behind the counter. "Help you?" she asked. I held up the umbrella. "This came with one of your tags." She adjusted her glasses, looked it over, and nodded slowly. "That was dropped off last week. Man said it wasn't about cleaning, just keeping something safe." My stomach tightened. "Did he say anything else?" She shook her head. "Just asked if I could hold it until someone came looking. Left no name." "Tall, dark coat, bit of gray?" Her face softened. "Yeah, polite, quiet. Looked tired, but kind. That was him. I left with the umbrella under my arm, but more questions than answers, and one feeling that lodged in my chest like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. He was still out there, somewhere, still thinking, still remembering, but not ready to come back. Not yet. That night, I placed the umbrella by the door where it used to hang. It didn't mean he was gone for good, but it also didn't mean he was coming back soon. Sometimes people leave parts of themselves behind not as promises, but as reminders. That what happened mattered. That you mattered. I didn't cry, but I did sleep with the umbrella near the window, and I left the porch light on. It had been almost 2 months. The rain had stopped haunting the city. Summer was inching in. Not with sunshine, but with that heavy, humid air that clings to your shirt and makes time feel slower. I hadn't meant to go back to the same ATM. I was just running errands, heading toward the bus stop when I turned the corner. And there it was. The same machine. Same flickering street lamp overhead. Same crack in the sidewalk where my son once tripped and laughed like nothing in the world could touch us. And suddenly, I was back there, under the storm, under the weight, with $84 in my checking account and a stranger behind me who looked like he hadn't seen kindness in years. That night, I had nothing to give, and somehow, I still gave. An umbrella, a place in line, a choice. I didn't realize how much it changed me until I stood there again. I stepped closer, reaching for my wallet, not because I needed to withdraw anything, but because I suddenly remembered this was the last place I had it. The wallet I thought I'd lost that night. The one with Mason's drawing inside. The one I grieved harder than I ever admitted. I glanced down the narrow alley to my left. And that's when I saw him. Elliot. He wasn't dressed like the man I first met. No more damp suit or sagging shoulders. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled, a canvas bag slung across his body. His steps were slow, hesitant, like he hadn't meant to be here either. But when he saw me, he didn't turn away. He walked up, close enough for his voice to land gently. I thought maybe I'd find you here again, eventually. I tried to speak, but the lump in my throat was quicker than my words. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out something familiar. My wallet. The stitching was still frayed on the edge, the zipper still a little sticky, but it was mine. I've kept it, he said. Longer than I meant to. I wasn't sure how to return it without disrupting something. I took it slowly, like I was afraid it might vanish if I blinked. Inside, the drawing was still there. Mason and I, hand in hand under a crooked rainbow. A stick figure family held together by a child's idea of forever. I looked up at him. You remembered. His smile was small, steady. I didn't just remember, he said. I carried it. In that moment, standing on the same cracked concrete where it all began, I felt something settle. Not closure, not magic, but recognition of everything we'd lost, and somehow, everything we were beginning to find. He asked if I had time for a walk. It wasn't a grand invitation. No flowers, no dramatic music in the background. Just 2 people standing near the curb outside a corner ATM, wallets in hand, and a shared silence that didn't sting anymore. I don't live far, I said. I know, he replied gently. I used to walk by, never knocked, didn't want to interrupt. We walked, side by side, the city humming around us like it always did. Soft traffic, kids laughing 2 blocks over, someone playing guitar off-tune from an upstairs window. For once, the quiet between us wasn't holding anything back. It was just peace. He asked about Mason. I told him about the latest obsession, planets and grilled cheese sandwiches. He smiled like he'd been waiting to hear about the ordinary. Then I asked where he'd been. He paused, then said, "Nowhere special. Somewhere quiet." "Running?" "No, resting, remembering who I was before I lost everything, and trying to forgive him." I nodded, not needing more. We reached the bench near the elementary school, the one with chipped blue paint and initials scratched into the side. I'd sat there a dozen times waiting for Mason's field trips to return. But this time, I sat down different. Not as someone waiting, but as someone ready. Elliot sat next to me. There was no tension, no unfinished conversation hanging between us. He looked at me, not searching, not second-guessing, just seeing. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what I'd say if I saw you again." "And?" "I think I'd just thank you." "For what?" "For not asking who I used to be." I smiled softly. "I figured you'd tell me when it mattered." He reached into his coat pocket, then hesitated. "May I?" I nodded. He pulled out a folded photo. It was old, worn at the corners. A little boy with wild curls and a woman with laughter in her eyes. They were building a paper rocket in a messy kitchen. "My son," he said. "Caleb." I didn't say I was sorry. I didn't need to. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was offering memory. "He died the year everything else fell apart," Elliot continued, and I kept pretending I didn't. I placed my hand over the photo, not to take it, just to touch the moment with him. "I never lost a child," I said, "but I lost versions of myself I'll never get back. And still, somehow, here we are." He looked at me with the quietest kind of awe. "Here we are," he echoed. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something truer. A beginning with no performance. Just presence. And for the first time since the rain, I wasn't shielding myself. Not from him. Not from what might come next. He didn't say goodbye. Not in the way people usually do. No wave from the window. No "take care," shouted through the rolled-down glass. Just a quiet look through the windshield. A steady breath. One last glance toward the bench where I stood. Then the car turned the corner and disappeared down Maple Avenue. I stayed still. Not because I was waiting for him to come back, but because part of me was still catching up. In my hand was the umbrella. Again. He'd given it to me minutes before getting into the car. The same old one, fabric soft at the folds, handle chipped, weight familiar. "I don't need it anymore," he'd said, holding it out. "But I think maybe you do." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. It wasn't about the rain. It was about the thing we shared long before names, jobs, or truths. The day 2 strangers stood in a storm, and one chose to make space. He said the trip was short. Just a few weeks. A meeting, some overdue family matters on the coast. "Nothing dramatic," he'd added. "Just life continuing." I wanted to ask if I was part of that life now, but I didn't. Not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I was willing to wait to hear it in his own time. Some bonds don't need pressure. They just need presence. The umbrella rested lightly in my grip, but it held so much more. It was memory. It was change. It was the day I gave without knowing I was also receiving. Back at home, Mason was asleep on the couch, one sock off, crayons spilled across the coffee table, a paper rocket ship halfway drawn. I watched him for a long time, this tiny, breathing reminder of why I kept standing, kept choosing, even on the worst days. I set the umbrella by the front door, propped neatly in its corner. The same corner where I'd first left it after the night I came home soaked and tired, unsure if what I had done mattered. Now I knew it did. Not because it led to some fairy tale. Not because a man with a story gave me answers. But because in that one small moment when the world felt indifferent, I chose kindness. And kindness, real, quiet, inconvenient kindness, changed everything. The next morning, I woke to sunshine through the blinds. I packed Mason's lunch without checking the bank balance. We still didn't have much, but we had enough. He saw the umbrella by the door and smiled. "Rain's not coming, Mom." "I know," I said. "I just like it there." He nodded, like that made perfect sense, then went back to his cereal. Some part of me believed Elliot would come back. But even if he didn't, even if life had other plans, the story wouldn't end with his absence. Because the umbrella was never the point. The rain wasn't either. The point was that two people, broken, uncertain, unseen, had found something in each other worth holding. I opened the door, felt the light breeze on my face, and stepped out, still holding the umbrella, still carrying the promise. One day I might say it out loud, but for now I'd keep walking. It started with a place in line. That's all. One spot, one decision made in the rain when I was too tired to think twice and too human not to care. He looked like someone who'd forgotten what kindness felt like. And maybe, at that time, so did I. I didn't give him much, not really, but maybe it wasn't about the umbrella, or even the gesture. Maybe it was about someone seeing you when you think the world stopped looking. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't even hope. It was a flicker, brief, almost invisible, but enough to light the next step. And step by step, we made something out of nothing. We didn't fix each other. That would be too easy. What we did was simpler and harder. We stood still. We stayed. When I think about all that's happened since, the conversations, the silences, the mornings with coffee that cooled too quickly, and the evenings where no one said goodbye because neither of us was leaving, I realize I wasn't just giving him space in line that day. I was giving myself permission to open the door again, to breathe slower, to let someone close, to trust that just because something broke once doesn't mean it can't be carried differently next time. I still don't know what we are, and strangely, I'm okay with that. Labels have always felt too tight for something this quiet and honest. What I do know is this. He saw me. Not the tired mom, not the paycheck barely stretching, not the woman who keeps smiling when the cupboards are light. Just me. And I saw him. Not the man who lost it all, not the faded suit or the silence, but the soul underneath, still trying to remember how to live. Somewhere in the middle of all that loss, we found a corner of peace. And I don't take that lightly. So yes, I gave up my spot at an ATM. And maybe I gave away a little comfort, a little time, a little convenience. But what I got in return was the slow, steady rediscovery of what it means to feel held, not rescued, just seen, respected. Home, I've learned, isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the moment someone steps closer instead of away, and if you're lucky, they stay. I once gave up my place for a stranger, and from there, quietly, gently, I found the long way home.